Hi there, Waltoneers, I'm Jack and this is DSY Newscast, but today is going to be a different kind of video. As you see, usually with a newscast style video, I have everything scripted out well in advance, so therefore I can provide the most amount of information possible in a concise format. And with that, I don't tend to muddle in too much of my own opinion, as you see, I believe that the news should be the news. But today, I want to go off script and give my opinion on the current state of the Walt Disney Company. And the reason why I want to do this now is because I see an issue which I think is being all too easily overlooked and should be a major area of concern for Disney in the immediate future. And that is the brand itself, and to be more specific, the slow erosion of the brand reputation as a direct result of the executive decisions being made by Disney CEO Bob Chapek. But before I get to my thoughts on Bob Chapek, which trust me, I definitely will, I think we should start by discussing why the brand reputation for Disney matters so much. As oftentimes I feel that analysts and pundits alike don't tend to touch on the brand reputation overall, as after all it's a non-tangible asset with no absolute scientific way of measuring it. And so they tend to hyper-focus on the financial health of the company, the quality of the Disney park experience, or the originality of the Disney content. And yet at the end of the day, it's the Disney brand that we see everywhere that's the glue that binds everything together. And look, I went to university for advertising and business and I studied branding in great depth. And without discussing complex branding theory and putting you all to sleep, there's this simple concept called the brand bank that perfectly explains the problem that Disney's facing. And it basically works like this. As when a company does something good in the eyes of a consumer and has a positive interaction, then they make a deposit within their brand bank. And if they make enough of those deposits between the consumer and the brand, then they will start to build up that goodwill and trust that all brands want. But if the company does something bad or does something negative in the eyes of a consumer, then that's when the company has to make a withdrawal upon that goodwill and trust that they've built up. And usually if there's a 50-50 healthy balance between the two, then that's a good, strong, healthy brand. However, if a company has a low balance on that brand bank, then that's when the consumers start to think about their allegiances and may shift to another brand. And over the past 2 years, with all of the unpopular decisions that Disney's been making, they've had to make withdrawal upon withdrawal from the brand bank, and they're now at risk of running a brand deficit in the eyes of a consumer. And look, I'm not stupid as I realise that Disney's been in a very hard financial position after the effects of the pandemic, which was a decision that was made even worse by the huge debt obligation that they had to absorb thanks to the former CEO Bob Iger's acquisition of 21st Century Fox in 2019 for a whopping $71 billion. But this sudden money grab that we've witnessed Disney do over the past 2 years in such a short period of time for the short-term profitability is inevitably going to have some negative consequences, which I don't even think Disney's going to realise until it's too late. As basically under Chapek, Disney's choosing the short-term profits in the here and now instead of the longer-term growth of the entire company, which is incredibly short-sighted when you think about the complexity of Disney's business. And for an example, Bob Chapek has said in interview after interview and has stated that there's tremendous pent-up demand for the Disney parks post-pandemic, which is clearly true, as after such a tough couple of years, who can blame people for wanting to go to Disney and forget about the state of the outside world for a few days? But here's the problem, as those families that love going to Disney every 2 to 3 years have either already returned or are about to return in the next year. And what they're going to find is what was once the Disney difference in the theme parks has now become in many ways the Disney difficulty. As yes, it was always somewhat of a mini military operation to try and get your family to go on a vacation to Disney, as it was always fairly complicated. But now it's become even more convoluted. And for an example, with the introduction of a park pass reservation system, it means you don't even have guaranteed entry to the park that you've purchased a ticket for, which just think about how crazy that is. So because Disney wants to practice yield management, as Chapek continuously says, it means that they constrict the supply of reservations for an arbitrary capacity number. Then there's the no park hopping until after 2 PM rule, which is yet another pointless addition, which makes it even more difficult for families to get around the various parks. And then on top of that, it's become more expensive with the $15 per day per ticket Genie Plus that needs to be added, so therefore you get the Fast Pass service back. And yet there's an additional charge for individual lightning lanes, so even if you do get Genie Plus, you don't get every single attraction included in it. And if that's not enough, they've also removed extras that made it worthwhile staying at a Disney resort, such as the Magical Express service between the airport and the resort, free parking at the resort, the Disney dining plan not returning yet, and extra magic hours have been scaled back to just half an hour before the park opens. And the big picture here is what all this is leading to is that Disney's going to end up having to spend twice as much on advertising in the long run to then convince those families to come back to Disney in 2 to 3 years' time when the demand starts to soften. But don't worry, apparently Disney have a big weapon in their arsenal, as Chief Financial Officer Christine McCarthy said in the most recent earnings call that they've raised the price of the tickets so much in recent years that they've now got additional headroom to apply discounts when the demand starts to soften. But a discount from an artificially high price to begin with just brings it down to normal prices, and that's not much of a discount. And if the recession that's been forecasted for next year turns out to be true, then the average family is going to have less disposable income to spend on what is a luxury vacation for many. And so Disney is increasingly becoming more and more unobtainable for families. And yet here's the other issue with the discounting strategy, as if Disney tries to offer discounts to try and offset the threat posed by Universal Studios and Epic Universe in 2025, then at the end of the day that strategy is only going to take you so far, as people only have a finite amount of vacation time and they can't just keep adding additional days to their trip. And so they're going to be forced to choose between either the brand new park down the road that they've never experienced before, or the same Disney park that they've experienced time and time again. And so in many ways, all of that combined is forming a perfect storm of sorts, which the Disney brand is not very well positioned to sustain, as they've been cashing out on an awful lot of goodwill and trust in recent years. But at the end of the day, the buck does stop at the top. And so the reason why Disney's in this current state or in this current position is through the short-term leadership style of the Disney CEO, Bob Chapek. As we all know, the old adage goes that you have to lead by example. And in this case, it's certainly true. And so if the CEO of the company doesn't speak the language of the brand and doesn't embody the company itself, then that's going to trickle down into every single decision, and that's what we've seen over the past 2 years. As I would argue that it's Chapek's lack of authenticity towards Disney which leads to him making blunders like saying Splash Mountain is over 60 years old when in actual fact it opened in 1989, or he goes and says in a commencement address that Walt Disney World is the happiest place on earth when we all know that that's the tagline for Disneyland. I do realise that this does seem incredibly nitpicky, but it's yet another demonstration that Chapek just isn't the consumer of the Disney product, and that is a concern when it comes to the Disney CEO. And on top of all of this, I also want to show you a recent example showing the tone in which Chapek talks about the Disney experience.
If you think about the nature of why people have great Disney memories, remember the end benefit is memories, magical memories that last a lifetime. The reason they have those, yeah, it's about the castle, and yeah, it's about the great attractions, or they really enjoyed that churro on Main Street, but really what they remember more than anything is guest cast interactions.
And let's just hit the pause button, as first of all, just imagine how demoralizing that must be to the creative Imagineers to hear their CEO talk about the themed worlds and innovative attractions that they create in such a throwaway tone. Then secondly, if Chapek truly does believe that the cast members are the park's unique selling point, then why is it that they are treated like an afterthought, like some numbers on a spreadsheet, when it comes to some controversial issues like we saw with his response to the Florida government fiasco earlier this year? And here's another thing.
When I ran parks for, gosh, I don't know what it was, like 7 years, almost, I would say 99% of the letters I got were about guest cast interactions not about attractions.
And once again, let me just correct the record here, as Chapek oversaw the parks and resorts for 5 years, not 7 years, as he stated. And secondly, of course people are going to send in letters about their cast member interactions, but to then misconstrue that as the primary marketing reason for why people go to a Disney park, it's simply completely missing the point. And yet here's another example of Chapek in the same interview talking about the Disney brand.
Even after 30 years, I am amazed at the elasticity of the Disney brand. We may be even more precious about what's Disney than the consumer base is.
But here's the problem with that kind of thinking, as just because they can use the Disney brand on anything, doesn't mean that they should. As over time, the emotional connection to the brand name isn't going to be there, and it's not going to stand for anything. But after watching interview after interview, I've seen many hours of Bob Chapek talk about the Walt Disney Company, and the one thing that I take away from the whole thing is I don't really feel like he's got much of a vision or direction for the future of the company. And look, I may be wrong here, but the way in which Chapek pivoted so quickly to talking about the metaverse just after Facebook rebranded themselves to Meta, and even made it one of his core pillars for his big memo for 2022 and the future of the company, just goes to show that he may be a market follower instead of a market leader. And with all of that being said so far, I actually want to say that I don't think Chapek is a bad CEO. Far from it. He's actually a very good, conventional business CEO, as he maximizes the profits, minimizes the losses, and maintains the health of the company. And God only knows that was definitely needed during the tough times of the pandemic to ensure Disney's survival. But the key word to all of that is a conventional business CEO. And we all know that the Walt Disney Company is anything but a conventional business. At the end of the day, he is the CEO of arguably the world's most creative company, going into a time of immense change without much of a strong vision for the future beyond that of the next quarterly earnings call. And potentially all of this could be resolved if there was a chief creative officer and Chapek was the chief executive officer handling the day-to-day business side of things, whilst having a chief creative officer have an allocated budget and have a strong direction for the company. But at the moment, it's this short-term thinking that's leading to a longer-term degradation of the overall Disney brand that's going to take them years to recover from. And so that's my stance on the current state of the Walt Disney Company, and I know that this hasn't been a particularly positive or rosy outlook kind of video, but I say all of this because I truly do care about the company and the brand, and I will always be a Disney fan at heart. But I don't just want to be a fan of Disney from yesteryear, but I also want to be a fan of Disney in modern day and beyond, seeing it not only survive, but thrive for the next 100 years. And so that's enough of me talking for today, but now it's over to you, as I would love to hear what are your thoughts and opinions on the current state of the Walt Disney Company and the Disney brand in general in the comments section down below. And with all of that being said, I've been Jack, you've been you, and I'll see you real soon.